Hey guys, what is going on? It is Alexander Williamson here with the secret history dying in your aquarium. So, recently I did some videos on a amazing group of fish that are known as Mormyrids. They're an African river-dwelling fish, and they actually have electrical receptors and electrical organs that allow them to sense, feel, and move around their environment, to send signals to each other and to talk, basically, in languages. And the males and the females have separate languages. There's videos that I just did about them in the last month, if you're curious, both in one on ancient Egyptians keeping them as pets, or at least for some reason they were keeping them and breeding them, or at least keeping them in large numbers and mummifying them and preserving them and things, according to the latest archaeology. And it predates koi and other fish by 2,000 years. So it's some interesting research, and it sparked me wondering, well, could I take care of one of these? And sadly, right now, it appears that I can't, because, well, let's go to the tank. Alright guys, so this was the 40-gallon breeder that I have set up for the Mormyrids. I have in here a whole lot of catfish, and so there's no surprise. I'm burying the lead here. One Mormyrid died one night and the next died the next morning. I had two in here, which is unusual. However, when I was at the pet store, there were two that were in a tank together, that had been together since they came in and were quarantined, and they were kind of like cuddled up next to one another, and they just didn't want to leave each other. And so they're usually either a solitary fish or a fish that hangs out in big groups. You can watch species profiles on them and things like that if you're curious more about their care and all that. But the bottom line is that they are a fish that lives in the Ubangi River and some of its tributaries in Central Africa. And there are other subspecies and similar related species. These elephant nose fish that I lost are the Peter's elephant fish, and they're Peter's IE, or Peter's EI. Peter's EI is how you would say their Latin name. And unfortunately, they lived in here for the last 2 months or so and seemed to be doing pretty well. They spent most of their time hanging out back under here, under this wood. And you can see here we've got phantom blue plecos, we've got Venezuelan corridoras that are the orange and black type, the Corridora venezuelas. And we also have the C25, C125 Aspidora spilotus is their Latin name, along with also 8 pepper corys, and this is all in a 40-gallon. And granted, there is a big biomass of hornwort. There have been floating plants, and then oddly enough, the top water's been so separate from the bottom water on half this tank that I put half beaks in here, because the water was right for the half beak, for what they like, and it allowed them to feed up alone up here. But I thought that would also shade out the Mormyrids, because they don't like bright light, and nor do any catfish particularly. These plecos, the phantom blue plecos, they're beautiful, and they look good in highlight and everything, and they don't seem to mind a little bit of daylight, but they aren't ones to hang out in it just for the sake of it. It's more just if they happen to be grazing on something and that patch is has got some sort of biofilm, algae, or wood on it that they want. So there's that. There's a Borneo loach in here, and then the last thing that's in here, other than banjo catfish, which there's 3 of, are these little teeny Gertrude rainbow fish, Pseudomagil Gertrude Aru 4s, and they were all getting along well. The nitrates were at 0, and I was changing the nitrates changing the water very frequently. 2 times a week I was doing a 50% water change because I was so worried that Mormyrids needed more water. I've read a lot saying that they need more water. Well, the hard part is I didn't know what killed the Mormyrids. Now, these Mormyrids were paired off, which is unusual I've never kept them before, but from everything I've read, and I would love feedback from somebody who's kept Mormyrids. These were both full-grown Mormyrids and full-grown Peter's eyes, or Peter's eyes. It's the word Peters and then 2 eyes afterwards, so I'm having a hard time pronouncing it, but it's named after a fellow with the name Peters. But I don't know what killed them, and that's the really frustrating part. One was under this log here, and I have some pictures, and I even have some film, and I feel like it doesn't need to be shared, honestly. But it was underneath the log, and to the point where it looked like the log had maybe shifted and fallen onto it. And so I got it out, and it looked alive still. Like, it looked like it had burrowed underneath the wood and was just stuck there. And I quickly realized that it was dead. Still very, very lifelike. Still, when I moved it and grabbed it out of there at night, it was twitching. So it still had some involuntary movement, and so I put it into another bucket and aerated it just with the same water, hoping that it would come back, and dragged it backwards, hoping I'd get water through the gills, and it was clear that it was gone. And I was worried about the other Mormyrid, so I ran a full panel of water tests on this tank. I even tested, I've got a copper test at the moment, and I've got phosphate test, I've got nitrates, nitrites, and ammonia, pH, and TDS, all that stuff, and nothing is out of place. In fact, everybody's colorful. Generally, the phantom blue plecos, or the apistos, the pair of apistogramma panduros, normally they would be discolored. These are Nesii. These are not panduros. Apisto Nesii would normally discolor, and that would give you a good indication. Also, you'd lose the white out of the fins of the Pseudomagil Gertrude. So I know the other species in here pretty well, and for that matter, the Cories. The Cory lose their vividness pretty extensively too if there's a water quality dip. Now, an interesting thing that was happening was all the Spilotus catfish, these little guys, the C125s, they were hanging out on the heater. And so I thought, well, maybe it's a temperature thing, or maybe there's an electrical current going on with the heater. And the other thing about the behavior of Mormyrids is it recommends keeping them in a 200-liter tank, so give or take 50 gallons or more, just for even one. And this was two full-grown ones, and I was a little skeptical, but at the shop they were in a 20-gallon, just kind of in like on their own because they didn't get along with the others. And they never fought any fish in here, but they were very shy, and so I'd try to feed them by actually using a turkey baster and giving them their bloodworms in the back of the tank. And the little snouts that they have allow them to sense blackworms, bloodworms, whatever, underneath the substrate. So I even selected a small patch area of substrate to bury some of the food so that they could dig it up and that the quarries and other critters wouldn't swarm in and take it right away as they were doing up in the front here, and kind of scaring off the Mormyrids, even though these Mormyrids were, one was easily 5.5 inches, and so you'd think that they'd be able to hold their own, but they're a very kind of peaceful fish generally. So in any case, the first one died. The next day, after checking everything and still being worried about how the other one would do, simply because they were kind of bonded like a pair too, which if anybody's had Mormyrids, please let me know if they pair bond for spawning, because maybe that happened. I've also lost cichlids in the past that way, where I lose a male or a female, and then they don't want to reproduce ever again, and stop eating and have other issues. I've had that happen with my lemon plecos even too. So I took the first one, I had it in the bucket overnight, left it there just to see, just in case it came back, left the bubble running and a heater in there. Of course it didn't. Rigor mortis set in. And then the next morning, not even 5 hours later, the second one was floating kind of halfway on its side, swimming a couple feet like across the whole tank, and then crashing into things like it had no directional control. And I have no idea what would do that, other than what I'm worried about was there a stray current or something from the heater that electrically was messing with their the way they find things. The only other thing that I can think of, there's two other things I can think of, and they're kind of unique to Mormyrids. One is oxygenation. So when you read about Mormyrids, a very recent paper, that specific species that I'm talking about that I kept, they have the highest brain to blood oxygen content ratio of any vertebrate in the entire world. So they need more oxygen in their blood than any other vertebrate in the entire world. And humans need a lot of oxygen in their blood, but these guys needed something like 12 times as much. So the surface tension breaking is what gives water oxygen. However, maybe I needed a spray bar or a bubble wand coming to the top, and what you see here with these little things bouncing, the little water bubbles popping, that's really what's giving you the gases and the O2 and the nitrogen-rich atmospheric air. That's what gets it into the water, is when the surface tension comes to the top and then breaks. It's not necessarily the bubbles down in the water. They move too fast up, and air and water both stick together as molecules in a way that underwater the air is being pushed together and there's surface tension around it, so the air doesn't diffuse. So just a side note, if you're supposed to keep a very oxygenated tank, that is done by surface agitation most effectively, rather than the air stones and things. Because the air stones work, like you can see here, there's an air stone, and I've got panda loaches, which also need pretty good air, surface agitation and air in their water. Unlike, say, a betta, where these guys don't need really much of any. Oh, he's angry. But in any case, could be that. The other thing that I was a little worried about was I fed them bloodworms and blackworms. And there is an issue where you can get bloating in the stomach if something gorges on such intense protein like bloodworms. And even though they are a species that was known to graze on bloodworms very heavily, it's just not able to eat a massive amount of them, just like pea puffers are not able to, and I just feel like I let them down. So I did an autopsy after this. The second fish died within an hour of me watching it struggling. And I tried adding 2 air stones to this tank at the time. Everybody else is fine in the tank. Lots of fish in there, and the nitrates are non-detectable. So, if you have any ideas what it was that I did that did them in for, I would appreciate it. Another interesting note was when I dissected them to make sure they didn't have any worms or parasites. I also like to look under the gill flukes. I like to look, around the cloaca and make sure there's no tear or fissures from their intestines and other organs. And none of that was present. And there was obviously no cancer or anything very obviously wrong. Now, they do have a very unique anatomy, and so when I cut into the tail, they have this little stick-like tail, the start of their tail, and then it forks back out. Very unusual looking. And that organ itself, even the next day on the one that had been in the bucket, when I cut into that just out of curiosity to see what that electric producing organ would look like, it twitched with any sort of, I figured out later through papers online because of frog legs that do it too, but it's any potassium, salt, or pH change can trigger it. Now, just touching and nerve signals and things like that can do it also, but that far after death, salt can do that to a number of dead things, tissues and things like that. But just that subtle change of cutting it open and exposing them to that new, to the scalpel I was using, did that. So it was an interesting organ to see. I really want to keep these fish again, but I would like to feel more confident in what happened. Now, did I lose a pair because I neglected them somehow? I really did a lot of research, and I have hundreds of fish in the fish room, and I always want to share with you guys my failures and my successes. You may remember that I lost 2 of the Haplochromis that are an unidentified species also about a month and a half or 2 months ago now. We've been in this house for almost 4 months now, and we also lost Sergio, who jumped out of the tank. And I'd named these Mormyrids, it's kind of silly, but I'd named them Mortimer and Mortimer the Mormyrid and Mordecai the Mormyrid. I don't know why I imagined them to be old Jewish rabbis when they talked. They had this old Yiddish accent whenever I thought about them talking with their electric signaling. And one was a female, one was a male, which you can tell by actually putting a headphone pickup in the tank and running it through a guitar amp, or other software works too, or other hardware I should say. But the females make these quick blips, whereas the males make these quick spike blips if you chart it out, whereas the females make kind of a woo drawn out noise that rises and then falls in its intensity. And they can produce up to 25 volts too, so I was always a little careful with that. And I wondered if when they were snuggled up together in the cave, if they could electrocute each other by accident, or if there was any issue like that. But they don't use the electricity so much for any sort of stunning prey or anything like that, so I don't think it was that. But I'd really appreciate it if you guys know anybody who is a long-time keeper of Mormyrids. I know they're not really bred in captivity so often. There's very few reports. But I'd really love to own these fish again. I mean, they weren't cheap either, but I really was babying them. And I fed them the bloodworms earlier in the evening, and everybody swarmed in, and I gave them theirs in the back of the tank where they were feeding. And so it's possible that they came to the front without me present. They're a little shy, and gorged on a bunch more bloodworms than I saw. However, their bellies were not full. They weren't bloated in any way. If anything, their back looked slightly indented, almost like their kidneys had an issue. But their kidneys also weren't shriveled or anything, from what I could tell. I mean, I don't know how they're supposed to look normally. They are a very odd fish anatomically, but from other fish I've seen where you do an autopsy on it, and maybe that's a video I'll make, but it's pretty graphic, and I know that can disturb some people, but it can inform you a lot on, if it was a parasite, if it was a cancer, if it was an infection, and or some sort of bacterial thing like an abscess that got your critters. But I just wanted to tell you guys, unfortunately, that I lost those fish. And it kind of hit me hard again because I lost Sergio, my angelfish of years, and my big boy that was 8.5 inches. And also lost 2 of the haplochromis that Lawrence Kent gave me when they got an ick outbreak when I moved my mustard synodontis in with them. So if you know anything, please drop me a response. I mean, as a fish keeper, you live and learn, but it's so frustrating when you don't know what did it. So I can put all the water parameters down below, pin a comment or something. But thanks for your time, guys. I just wanted to let you know because I didn't want to get bummed out during the live stream and talk about it or get off on a side tangent. So I just figured I'd upload a video and let you guys know now. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Thanks for subscribing and watching and sharing videos when they're interesting and passing on them and telling me when they're not. But these fish were really interesting, and so was their history. So I'm sad that I don't have them anymore. But I don't want to kill any more until I figure out what happened. So, thanks, guys. Take care. Bye.